Actually, it's not Springtrap. But
ladies, gentlemen, and those with the good sense to do away with the whole notion, I welcome you to the premier audio medium for all your Fazbear entertainment needs, the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. Note, FFPP is not responsible for any loss of appetite, disinterest, dismemberment, or other legally classified statuses. So strap in and enjoy.
hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. I'm your host with the toast, Right Toast, here to talk about Five Nights at Freddy's. Believe it or not, I'm still a little bit sick, and it makes my life miserable. But we press on no matter what. Today, we're obviously going to be talking about Into the Pit. I mean, what else could we talk about? A brand new FNAF game came out last week. It's all I've been thinking about. It's all the community's been thinking about. Of course, we're going to talk about it. Mark's going to join us for an unspecified amount of time because he's very clingy today. But he's being annoying and won't lay down. He's doing that thing that, like, I don't know if your guys' cats do this. He likes to be on a lap, but he hates to settle on a lap. He wants to be standing, but be on your lap. And I'm like, bud, you can't do that. It's annoying. So as long as you settle, you can stay. But yeah, like, this is the game that has been sweeping everything. I think it's like it was like number 3 in like global Steam sales at some point. It's just overall an amazing game. It's just, okay, so we'll go into each topic, I guess. We'll go systematic. I've got some notes to kind of steer my thoughts so I don't just ramble for 30 minutes and repeat myself. In case you somehow haven't played it yet or haven't watched someone play it, there will be spoilers being discussed. So I recommend playing the game before you watch this podcast, or at least watching somebody else play the game, or play the game. It's like $20. It's probably the best FNAF game we've ever gotten. It's very, very, very good. But the game itself, the basic premise, I don't want to go over the whole plot because I feel like I've gone over the plot of this game like 5 times on this channel in the past month. You guys know what the plot of Into the Pit is at this point. But in case somehow you've missed it, the basic premise is that Oswald, our main character, is using the ball pit of Jeff's Pizza, which was once a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, to travel back and forth between time to save the children to save other children around the missing child incident. Meanwhile, the yellow rabbit, this biological seeming spring bunny looking creature, kidnaps it and replaces his father and is trying to kill him. So you avoid the rabbit and you save the kids and eventually your father. That's the game. It's really good. Like, it's crazy how good it is. My notes right now for this section are quality, tab. It's so good. Enter. It's like really so good. Like, it's that good. We haven't really had a game like it yet in the franchise. Like, we've had stealth exploration games with Security Breach, but as far as like a 2D pixel art, kind of like slower game, I guess is a way to put it, we haven't really had something like that. And it works really well for this franchise. I hope Mega Cat Studios, the development company that made this game, makes more FNAF games, and it sounds like they're going to. In the interview Scott did with Dalko, he mentioned that like he really wants them to work on like a fetch game, a game about the story fetch. And the fact that he wants them to do story about fetch, the 3-star ending of the game ends with See You, which is a teaser for fetch, and that this game is so incredibly well received and selling super well, I feel like that's just an inevitability. When will we get it? I don't know. I think this game took like 2 years to make, so expect it in like a year or 2, maybe. I'm not sure. I would rather them take their time and make out another banger than rush out another game. But this game is legitimately that good. I mean, it's bringing in non-FNAF fans to the point where like every streamer I know has been playing. Iron Mouse played this. And like, I'm pretty sure, I don't know too much about Iron Mouse. I've seen her play FNAF stuff in the past, but like, I wouldn't call her like a FNAF tuber or anything. You know what I mean? Like, so it's bringing in casual fans, non-FNAF fans. Fucking Fiznom liked it. Like, if Phil likes it, that's a huge endorsement. You know what I mean? So it's that good. It's that solid of a game. And I'm hoping that this game leads to another influx of new fans. One of the best things that Security Breach did for this fandom, regardless of how you think about the game, one of the best things that Security Breach did for this fandom is it brought a massive wave of new FNAF fans to this franchise. And I'm hopeful that a game like Into the Pit is going to do the same thing, especially because it's so different gameplay and art style wise. Like, I could definitely see a section of people who would like FNAF but don't like traditional FNAF games. And hopefully Into the Pit is a gateway for those people to enjoy this franchise that we all love. Because, like, I'm the opposite of a gatekeeper. I want as many people to like the thing I like as possible. So when a game like this comes out and so many people are playing it, so many non-FNAF people or casual FNAF people are playing it, it gives me a lot of hope for new fans to enter this franchise. And not only that, for the people who are already in this franchise, I think it's a great way to kind of share the plot lines and stories of the books to FNAF fans who don't want to or can't read them. Not like in a literacy sense, but more in the sense of, like, not everybody can afford to buy these books. Some people don't have these books in their local libraries, and then they don't want to go online to, like, get, like, pirated PDFs of these stories. So for those people, this is another great experience of, like, hey, if you've got a computer, you can play one of these books and know the story that people are talking about. So that's super helpful, especially because Into the Pit specifically is such an important story for Agony, which we'll get into later, that even if it came out, if Scott came out today and said, like, Into the Pit as a story, not in continuity, doesn't matter. It teaches us so much about Agony, it's important regardless. And gives us more information on the missing child incident, you know? But I think a big reason why this game is doing so well, besides just the fact that it's a different art style and that it's very good, it's one of the very, very rare instances in Five Nights at Freddy's in general where a game is simultaneously scary and really fun to play. That doesn't happen very often in Five Nights at Freddy's. It's usually one or the other. Usually a game is fun to play or it's scary. So the fact that it's scary and fun to play is really refreshing. But I wanted to take some time today and kind of go over what I didn't touch on in last week's video, because last week's video was more of a plot summary, Easter egg explanation, and some very, very light speculation. I'll probably do a big old theory video on it in like a week. I think this week's video is going to be about the secret of the mimic. Next week will probably be a really in-depth theory video about Into the Pit. I'll probably do a video on 5 laps at Freddy's after that. Then either we'll do another Into the Pit video, or I don't know if a week before comes out at that point. I don't plan that far ahead. But next week will probably be my in-depth Into the Pit video. And I kind of wanted to share my thoughts here about like what I think about the theory surrounding this game and like what this game is actually like, the real story versus what Oswald is experiencing and things like that. Not to say like the game isn't presenting us the real story, but like, are we actually time traveling? Stuff like that. So I guess it's time to go into that. Off the bat, it should be noted, obviously, this game is dramatically different from the original story. That's not to say it's unfaithful. It's very faithful to the original story. But I mean, the game starts like a third, if not halfway into the story, does the rest of the story, and then like continues. Very much so. Like, it should be noted, in the original story, Oswald does not go back to the past after the missing child incident. Once he sees the missing child incident, the rest of the story is him dealing with the yellow rabbit in the present day. And then he goes back to save his father by pulling him out of the ball pit. He never goes back into the past after the missing child incident. Meanwhile, that's the beginning of this game. So like, there are dramatic differences of this story. Regardless, it is still very faithful to this story. It has the same essence and the same like overarching plot. They just made it into like a fun to play video game. It makes me wonder if, because Return to the Pit, the back of that story, the description has the tagline that the Return to the Pit is the basis for the new game Into the Pit. So I wonder if Return to the Pit will be much closer to the game than the original story. Kind of giving us some more information there for the game that we didn't get previously. So I'm interested to see how that will go, especially like ending wise, because like as far as Into the Pit goes, there's 5 endings, right? You can leave out the front door at any time. You can save your dad without the photo, so Oswald gets captured. You can save your dad with the photo, and then whether or not you do the other shenanigans, you either get the 2-star or 3-star good ending. And then there's also the ending where you get the odd photo, but then you fail the QuickTime event, and the yellow rabbit captures you, and you maybe become Foxy, ? So that's what, like 1, 2, 3, that's 5 endings. Meanwhile, the Return to the Pit has 25 plus endings. Now, we have learned from VIP that, I guess technically we haven't. So VIP only had, I want to say like 6 to 8 true endings. Everything else was a game over screen. I was going to say that's evidence that they're counting game overs as endings, but that's not technically true. They might be, we don't know, but VIP never said how many endings it had. It said several various endings because it was half as long because it's the free one. So we don't know. If there truly is 25 plus the end pages, that'll be very interesting. I think it's more likely that they're game over screens, but we'll see when we get there. That being said, you know what happens when you play the game, but like what is actually going on here? Like what is the real story of Into the Pit? Are we traveling back and forth through time and Springtrap is chasing us? I don't think so. First of all, it's definitely not Springtrap. That's something I saw a lot of like casual and non-FNAF fans kind of mistaking, and I don't blame them at all. It's a completely understandable mistake to make to see this yellow spring bonnie and go, oh, it's Springtrap. Because like, what other point of reference do you have for that? But technically, and the game does specify this in the difficulties, this entity is known as the Yellow Rabbit. It's never given an official name other than Oswald calling it the Yellow Rabbit or the Yellow Monster or that thing, that rabbit. It's very ephemeral. It's not like a named creature. It is a manifestation, if you will. Not to actually, it's not Springtrap. But the question that becomes, if it's not Springtrap, what is it? And there is a debate on that. We don't get a direct, specific answer as to what this thing is. But we have some pretty good guesses. No matter how you slice it, in some way, the Yellow Rabbit seems to be a manifestation of agony. Now, for those who are unaware, if you've never read any of the FNAF books or you've missed some of my recent videos, the easiest way I can describe agony is it's the energy of the most negative human emotions. So remnant, a word you're probably more familiar with, is the mixture of soul or positive emotion or energy or memory and metal. It's specifically that combination is what remnant is. And it's that physical substance that can be used, which is remnant. Meanwhile, agony is sort of the opposite of it, but it's also not physical. So agony is not the mixture of an emotion and metal. Agony is just that energy or negative emotion or negative memory manifest. It's seen in its like neutral state. The man studying it in the book says you can't really see it, but you can observe it using some tools and some special lighting. However, it can manifest, and that's what we're kind of seeing here. Agony can either manifest directly, but it often needs a host, something to possess, essentially. And it's better if that possession has some sort of intelligence or consciousness to help direct it. And once it is possessing something and it has that infection, that host of that, then it's able to further manifest, where we see Eleanor, a character we'll get to in the books, who has agony within her, is able to manifest these like tendrils of black energy, and that's thought to be part of agony. So going back to the Yellow Rabbit, we're not actually seeing William Afton here. William Afton's body and his person is not here. What is most likely, as far as we can tell, is that it's possible that there was a Spring Bonnie suit at this Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and the missing child incident happened at this Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and the horrible agony surrounding that event took host and possession into the Spring Bonnie suit, creating this weird semi-organic, seemingly impossible creature. It's also theorized and speculated that the reason it looks so monstrous and toothy and frightening is because that's what the kids of the missing child incident saw him as in their last moments. So that kind of goes into, it's less that the Yellow Rabbit isn't William Afton. Most likely, the Yellow Rabbit is a manifestation of the agony of the victims of the missing child incident. It's the monster they've created in their mind after seeing what William is capable of. Now, it is possible that the Yellow Rabbit is just a manifestation, just a hallucination, if you will, at least in the present day. And the main reason I think so is if it were a physical suit, I think it would be harder for people to assume it's actually Oswald's father. I believe, now this is heavy speculation, but I believe during the present day, Oswald sees this Yellow Rabbit, but everyone else sees Oswald's father because it is just Oswald's father, possibly under the control of this agony. But Oswald is experiencing these hallucinations. That's why he sees the Yellow Rabbit. And it's not only the Yellow Rabbit. We don't really see this much in the story, but in the game, I think there's more evidence for this. In the fact that throughout the daytime segments, Oswald starts seeing more and more hallucinations. His teacher turns into the Yellow Rabbit. His fellow students turn into animatronics and endoskeletons, even though they're still just his actual fellow students. He's not being transported. He's not being technically haunted. It seems more accurately that he's getting more and more of these hallucinations. So if the Yellow Rabbit is more of a manifestation of agony, what about the ball pit? The ball pit is real, but are we traveling back through time? This, I think, is more up for debate. I would argue the original story does not suggest actual time travel. Sorry, let me rephrase. The original story, while saying it is time travel, gives evidence for another explanation. In the original story, like I mentioned, Oswald goes to the past very frequently, but nothing really ever comes back with him, and while he's in the past, stuff just happens. Like at some point, his pockets just start filling up with tokens. He's able to eat pizza even though he comes back a little hungry. Like to me, in the story, it doesn't suggest he's actually time traveling, but instead experiencing this agony-induced hallucination. And the epilogues kind of give more evidence to that explanation. In the epilogues, we eventually get to this ball pit again, and it's found that there's blood and agony of victims throughout the years in this ball pit, to the point where the Stitch Wraith, we may get to today, I'm not sure, as the Stitch Wraith, or at this point just Jake, falls into the ball pit as his last thing he can do, he starts recognizing that there are spirits in this ball pit. There are memories trapped in this ball pit. And he visits one of them, Millie, in Count the Ways, a story that is represented in this game in a secret minigame. And he sees Millie reliving this horrible, purgatory, essentially, in her own mind. And he places himself into that purgatory and saves her. He tells her to go be with her family. She'll be happier, essentially. And she does, and suddenly one of the balls turns gold and silver instead of the murky off-color plastic balls they were. And one by one, these balls start turning. Now, in the story, it's implied that these spirits are able to rest, not necessarily move on, but find peace. So what I think the book is suggesting is that it's not that Oswald enters a ball pit and travels through time, but instead, Oswald fully submerges himself in this ball pit, and I think he counts to 100. So when he does this, wait, counting to 100 might explain the gumball minigame. One of the secret minigames that accesses Count the Ways, you have to touch a candy machine. People say so many different numbers. People say 98. I've heard people say 87. I've heard people say 50. I think it's 100. We have to find that number out for sure. In the story, he counts, I'm pretty sure he counts to 100 every time to go back into the past. If that's the same amount of times he touches the candy machine, that may be significant, regardless. And then after he's fully submerged for that long, he comes up and he's back in the past. What I think the book is suggesting is when he's in there surrounded by all of that agony, he's actually receiving the memories of the missing child incident victims, and he's able to travel through their memories and see what they are reliving every day in this weird purgatory. So I don't believe it's real time travel in the original story. The game does seem to imply time travel, though, because the things you're doing in the past affect the present. For example, on, I believe, night 3, the yellow rabbit bursts through the arcade doors and breaks them. Moving forward in the present, those doors are no longer there. They were there and now they're not, implying that when Jeff bought the place, there was some broken doors that he just threw out and left the doorway open. Or, for example, on one of the nights you have to scare a customer by dropping a rat so you can get into the kitchen. So you go into the past to catch a rat and bring it to the future, and somebody else sees that rat and gets scared. So, like, how does that work if this is a hallucination? It wouldn't. So the game seems to be implying that this is real time travel, which is interesting. Which maybe the original story was trying to go that route too, but I thought there was a more logical explanation. It should be noted, I see a theory on the rise that seems very interesting and might end up being the correct interpretation of this game, that being loop theory. I mentioned that in the story, the ball pit is kind of this collection of memories, and people are living out these purgatories within this ball pit. This theory kind of speculates that Oswald is already in one, and that this game isn't necessarily Oswald encountering the ball pit for the first time, but Oswald has died, and in this ball pit, he's reliving the memory of what happened and what led him there. So I think that is also very possible, and it explains a lot of the weird inconsistencies surrounding the time travel aspect, and it also explains a lot of the weird Easter eggs that keep popping up, because it could be trying to explain that these memories are beginning to merge and congeal together. As far as like my best guess for the story of Into the Pit, and maybe this will change by next week when I make that video, but as of now, the game Into the Pit, I believe, is Oswald is visiting this ball pit and submerging himself. And when he's in the ball pit, the agony of the missing child incident victims infect his mind and memories. Him going to the past isn't actually traveling through time, but visiting the different purgatories of the victims of the missing child incident. Note that the first night we go back there, we see the missing child incident and we see the bodies in that room. But every night after that, the bodies are no longer in that room, but there are children trapped throughout the pizzeria. What I think is going on here isn't that we're finding the kids who didn't make it out on time after the missing child incident. I think we're seeing the event that has caused their agony to congeal and amass in this ball pit, and then night by night, we are exploring each of their memories and freeing them from their own purgatory so they can rest. Not that they're moving on or feeling better, but at least that they can rest and not be tormented anymore. And once we do all of that, the whole time we're also looking for our father who has been possessed essentially by this agony. Now, that being said, the differences we see during the day and the weird, like the yellow rabbit appearing during the day, I believe are the effects of agony creeping into Oswald's mind. I think Oswald is hallucinating a lot of the strange things happening outside of the ball pit. For example, the door being changed, the rat being in the past, probably just in the present, or his father being the yellow rabbit. These are hallucinations, and the game supports Oswald having hallucinations in the school segments. His teachers and his classmates turn into animatronics, like we've said. Oswald is written in blood on the chalkboard for a moment. There's that whole day 4 scene where everyone starts turning into animatronics. He's having these hallucinations, and we know they're hallucinations. So I think the differences we're seeing during the day outside of the ball pit are similar hallucinations because of the effects agony is having on Oswald's mind. So that's really my thoughts on what is actually going on. And then as far as like, okay, what about, so sure, Oswald's dad is just Oswald's dad being possessed and he sees the yellow rabbit. What about the ending when we're saving his dad from the yellow rabbit? I think that's the best evidence that the yellow rabbit in some way is a physical suit that has been possessed with agony. Not to mention the Golden Freddy suit is lying around. Why is it so weird for the Spring Bonnie suit to be doing the same? So I think to a point that the suit may have been in the ball pit too this whole time, right? That suit may have been at the bottom of the ball pit collecting this agony as well, and that's why he pops out of it. I'm not sure. But it is worth I think that is a worthwhile explanation. And I think it still would make sense if there was a physical suit that the creature in our house is just our dad that we're hallucinating to be the yellow rabbit. I think that makes the most sense. So I'll collect my thoughts better and organize it better for the full video on it in a week or so. But I hope for those who are kind of confused about the game, this might help bring some clarity. Other than that, I don't really have much to say on it. Because I don't... There's the debate of, okay, is this game in continuity? And like, I feel like I want to say yes, because there isn't a great reason as to no. Because there are a lot of Easter eggs, and I get that, but there's always been a lot of Easter eggs. And the fact that, like, this is meant to be a 10th anniversary game, they're going to increase the amount of Easter eggs for sure. The only hesitations I have for if it is an in-universe game is the game itself is framed in a way which makes it seem like it's... Sorry, let me rephrase that, because I jumbled my words together. My only hesitation that this game may be in continuity is that the framing of this game, to me, seems that it is arguing it's an in-universe game, which definitely gets weird and confusing and feels more unlikely. But the fact that the main menu is a TV, the credits and a lot of the menu settings are on a TV, the game frames itself as a inside of a monitor TV screen video game, which makes me like hesitant to say, is this an in-universe game? But I feel like that's almost impossible, because if it's in-universe, then Fazbear Frights and arguably Tales on the Pizzaplex have to be in-universe books, which seems crazy to me. But I don't know. We'll have to see. I would be very annoyed if... I think the worst outcome here is this game is in continuity, but its own continuity. And there's two video game continuities. I think that's the worst option. I hope that's not true. I think the most likely options are that this game is either in continuity or not. I think it's unlikely that it's an in-universe game, and I think it's unlikely that it's in a separate continuity. But I understand the idea of the both sides of this argument. Like, I totally understand thinking it's it's an in-continuity game, because like there's no great reason why for it to not be, so just it's assumed it is. But I do understand the point of view of like, well, Scott said this was meant to just be a small thing and it grew bigger over time, so they said just go for it. And it really muddies the water a lot, so it would make more sense if it's just its own fun thing. I don't know. End of the day, I'm really not sure on its continuity status. I think it leans more towards in continuity than not, but I have not settled on it. And I think I want to pick a stance by next week's video to really, like, at least for myself, right? Like, I'm not going to try to prove one way or the other if it's in continuity, but for my own sanity and to be able to use this game for lore, I'm going to have to make a decision on that front. But that's where I'm at. So we'll move on to questions. If you have any questions, actually, before we move on to questions, if you like this podcast and you want more long form content, I've been advertising Ridos a bunch. I'm sure you've heard about the channel. It's my third channel. The only reason I made a third channel is because long form, slower content will all be on that channel moving forward outside of this podcast. And I thought it was just a lot of people were looking for that kind of content from me. I think people said like that you like my voice and you want to hear it in longer, slower formats to study to, or to listen at work, or to go to sleep to. So I'm like, yeah, it's not super difficult for me to provide that. I might as well. But I just launched my second ever podcast, and that podcast is on Ridos. First episode went out on Monday this week, so hopefully yesterday if this comes out on time. And it's etc. It's a podcast between me and my wife, and we spin a wheel to see what we're going to talk about. And if the podcast episode isn't long enough, we spin the wheel again, and we just keep doing it. We did one episode so far. It's been really fun. Expect the branding to change. I don't love the logo I made, and I don't love the thumbnail I made. But I'm not good at creating those, so expect those to change. I'll probably play around with them a bit until I find something that I really like. I don't know if that podcast might end up on Spotify. I'm not sure. Because I don't know how to post multiple podcasts on Spotify. I might have to make a new Spotify account. I don't know how that works. But if anything from that third channel goes on Spotify, it would be that etc. podcast. But I'll put a link in the card right here if I remember. If not, it'll be in the description, hopefully. But yeah, go check it out. I think it was really fun. First episode is mostly about how we met and what candy we do and don't like, and then we talk about a Reddit post for a bit. But yeah, so moving on to questions. If you want your questions answered on the podcast, feel free to send them into Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. That is in the description to copy and paste if you want to not type it because it's a pain to type. I took the Spotify Q&A feature still isn't there, so that's the best way to reach the podcast. But our first question comes from Zach, him. With the Mimic game coming out and showcasing the date 1979, wouldn't that be before any known murders? Is it possible we're getting a retroactive kid killing in the new game? Also, is it possible the Mimic killed the DCI after failing to copy the MCI? And that's why the bodies were never stuffed. He just put on one of the Springlock suits and went to town. Thank you for your question, Zach. So, as far as the 1979 date, you are correct. As far as we're aware, the earliest deaths in this franchise all happened in the 80s. We don't have evidence to say that any murders or deaths happened in the 70s. That being said, I don't think it would be a retroactive or a retcon to say someone died in the 70s. Because the biggest question that's always been throughout Five Nights at Freddy's for the longest time is what started it? Why did this happen? Why did these killings happen? And one of the answers has always been William's just a psychopath, which is fine. Like, that's just, you can have that and move on with that. But if something were to have caused his spiral into madness and it happened in the 70s, that would explain it. This is also to say, it's not a guarantee. Sorry for rubbing my eye. It's allergies this week has been crazy. If one of my eyes starts getting red, that's why. That is to say, it's not a guarantee that a kid is going to die in this game. All we know is it's the secret of the Mimic, and it seems very likely to be Fall Fest. Like I said, this week's video, I already have all my thoughts on it. I wrote a whole, 6-page script on this video. Really excited to share my thoughts on it. But what we do know is that Fall Fest has been associated with fires a lot. So I think it's going to be less likely that, a kid is going to be directly killed. But my best guess for the secret of the Mimic is it's going to be the cause of the Fall Fest fire, and likely kids will die in that fire. So that's my thinking of it. And that could be a good cause for all of the things that happen after this of oh God, kids have died. I'm going to try to look into immortality. Or that has scared me. I will start to look into immortality. Because one of the really interesting things, one of the more compelling things about William Afton's character, I believe, is how afraid he is of hell and death. He is terrified to his core of hell and death, repeatedly in this franchise, in the books, in the games. There's a part, I think that's part of the reason why in Henry's speech, he says, the darkest pit of hell is waiting for you. So don't keep the devil waiting for you, my old friend, or whatever. And I think that really gets William to his core. So I wonder if this game is going to establish that the Fall Fest fire is in part William's fault. Whether or not the Mimic caused it, it's in part William's fault. And William knows he's going to hell for this. So in his weird, warped, twisted mind, his solution is, if I never die, I can't go to hell. And maybe that's what starts it all. I don't know. I could think that could be, I didn't think about that until now, so that's not this week's video. But I think that could be a really interesting character development for William, and it would kind of make everybody happy, I think, because there's kind of two camps about William, where there's people who are I kind of want him to have his own sick, twisted reasoning to be more of a compelling villain, and there's other people who say, well, he does horrible things, he doesn't need a reason, he can just be sick and twisted. That's true, but I think the idea of he does something that causes people to die horribly once, and he knows he's going to hell. And now his villain's motivation is, if I am immortal, I can't go to hell. That's a really interesting motivation. So I kind of hope that's where we go with this. As far as your second question, I'm of two minds. I think the Mimic doing the dead child incident, that being the FNAF 2 dead kids incident, makes a lot of sense on one hand, because I like what you say, like the idea that it's mimicking the MCI, but not fully. It doesn't know the bodies were stuffed. It just knows that kids were killed. So that's what it's doing. That's really interesting. My only hesitation is that I would assume the Mimic is kept essentially in storage until we free it in Ruin. I think Secret of the Mimic happens, the Mimic is locked away and not brought out until Ruin. So it wouldn't have had the opportunity to. That's my guess. But then again, it seems like the books suggest that Fazbear had a whole line of Mimic endoskeletons. So who's to say? But thank you for your question, Zach. Our next question comes from Apo13 Pro, they, them. What's your theory with the least proof of evidence, with the least proof or evidence to back it up from the timeline? Thank you for your question. So you're asking me what's my weakest point in my current timeline. There's a couple, because like I've mentioned, the way that I think you have to build a FNAF timeline anymore is you take the direct evidence from the games and you link it. That first link is assumptions, but you kind of have to, because we don't have direct evidence for a lot of this timeline. But then with that link, you start to speculate on top of that. And that third layer is where there's often a lot of disagreements. Then there's a fourth layer, and this fourth layer for most people is the details, right? So let me give an example. We know for a fact that FNAF 2 takes place in 1987. And we know for a fact that one of the minigames depicts that children are killed at that location. And we know for a fact that another minigame suggests regular Foxy sees 5 missing child incident kids. And we know for a fact that in FNAF 1, the newspapers say that there were 5 kids killed in a missing child incident. So those are the facts we have. That's our layer 1. Our layer 2, our linking assumptions, is that there was 5 kids killed at the FNAF 2 location, and there was 5 kids killed at the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. So it's a total of 10 children. That's our layer 2, and that these are 2 separate events. One happens in 87, and one happens before that. Now our layer 3, we bring in extra evidence. The book gives the date 1985 several times. The different books do that. And now Into the Pit gives us 1985 in a game. So we have that. And now we can make this layer 3 of a missing child incident happens at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in 1985, and then later in 1987, 5 more kids are killed, but their bodies are not stuffed into suits, so this is a different circumstance. And within this layer 3, we can continue that the original suits are possessed by those missing child incident kids, bringing in Give Gifts of Life and a couple other instances and the books. Whereas in the second event, we don't have direct evidence. So some people will then assume that the toys are possessed by them. Some people assume they don't possess anything. Now we get to the layer 4. This is where details come in. Details like the names of the missing child incident victims or the person who did that's kind of the example that I'm giving. So theories with least proof or evidence, I'm going to say is most of my layer 4, because I think that's what most layer 4s are, the details. As far as like a full-on point of my timeline with very little proof or evidence, I would say is my plot line, my whole character interpretation of Jeremy Fitzgerald, because I believe that Jeremy Fitzgerald is Michael's friend and the Bonnie bully. And then after the crying child is killed, he gets very close to Michael and they become very good friends. Michael is then used by William to get information in the FNAF 2 location. But Jeremy Fitzgerald also helps out. Michael asks him to help him out with this, essentially. Jeremy Fitzgerald gets a job at FNAF 2 and is the victim of the bite of 87. After that, he loses a lot of his memories. He knows he loves FNAF, but that's about it. He goes on, he lives the rest of his life pretty much unbothered by the Aftons, until his daughter Cassie, much later in life, loves the Mega Pizzaplex and he starts working there. And so I believe Jeremy Fitzgerald from FNAF 2 is also the Bonnie bully, is also Cassie's dad, is also the Help Wanted 2 protagonist. That through line, admittedly, has very little evidence, but I think it makes a lot of logical sense, so that's why I've been going with it. That's probably my least evidence-backed chunk of my timeline, I would say. But thank you for your question. Our next one comes from Who Talk, They Them, thank you for your question. Could the Fazbear Frights stories be fear experiments by William Afton? Great question. Out the gate, I want to say no, only because we don't have any evidence outside of Help Wanted, the story, and Didophobia of nightmare gas or illusion discs being used to induce fear on a subject. So Didophobia shows us in the stories that there's a version of FNAF 4, which is an experiment on the effects of fear on the human brain done by William Afton. That makes, and that goes into that, and like, that technology seems to be used again in Help Wanted when they force Steve Snodgrass to make Five Nights at Freddy's games, and they give him horrible nightmares to help fuel those Five Nights at Freddy's games. But I think that's kind of where that ends, because the Fazbear Frights stories have so many weird instances where a fear experiment doesn't really make sense, especially because the fear experiments specifically are wandering and listless. Like in Didophobia, what was his name in Didophobia? Rory, I believe. I'm gonna assume it was Rory. Rory, the kid in Didophobia, throughout the day, like wanders his house as if he's lost, and then goes back to bed. Then he has nightmares, and then he wakes up, wanders his house as if he's lost, and then goes back to bed. It's very routine. It's very confusing and ethereal and misty and foggy. It's strange. That doesn't line up with Fazbear Frights stories. The Fazbear Frights stories and the other Tale stories are very detailed. They're going throughout their lives. Different things are happening. Whereas in Didophobia, it's very much not. So I don't think it's possible. Could you interpret it that way? I'm sure you could find evidence to argue that. Maybe William gets better with his experiment. It's hard to say. I think it's very, very, very unlikely for that to be the case. It's a good question, though, and thank you for asking it. And our last question comes from Aaron, he, him. In regards to the newest FNAF model, VIP, was it mentioned whether or not Devon took off the MOE at all in any of the paths or endings? Thank you for your question. So for those who haven't read the book or didn't be in the stream for the read-along, the VIP introduces an MOE, or I think it's like the max occupancy experience, where you can put on a Freddy helmet and experience an AR version of the Pizzaplex where you can still go on rides without having to actually go on rides in case they're full or there's too many people or it's under construction, so on and so forth. And you, to beat the game and to beat the book and to beat VIP, you need to enter the MOE once, and then in the digital Pizzaplex, enter it again. So you're entering the MOE twice to multiply your score by 10 times to be able to get 100,000 points. That being said, as far as I'm aware, never is it mentioned that we take off the MOE or the MOE ends. There is one implication that it would, though. That being, when you fully beat VIP, you unplug the power strip in the server room that he was plugged into, and the whole Pizzaplex starts malfunctioning very violently. This can be interpreted two ways. Either you can interpret it that the MOE also shuts down and he takes it off, or there's a very real possibility that that's what he's seeing within the MOE, and the MOE never shuts off and he's still in there, which is very fitting for Tales from the Pizzaplex. A common ending for Tales from the Pizzaplex is they get out of their VR headset, but then they're still being attacked and they've never left, and then they've been dead inside the VR headset or something like that. So that is definitely possible for VIP. I will say, I don't believe it is ever directly stated that Devon takes off the MOE helmet. So it's either implied that he shut it down when he shuts down VIP, or him seeing everything shut down is fully within the MOE. We don't know, and I think that's really interesting. So thank you for your question. Once again, if you want your questions answered on the podcast, you can send them into Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. That is in the description to copy and paste because it's a pain to type. But in the meantime, thank you for watching the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, where the pizza abilities are endless. We hope to enjoy your future patronage. Bye-bye for now.